I ran away from home in the dead of night, the screen door slamming shut behind me, the silence amplifying my fear. Then I found out my entire life was a lie. The screen door slammed behind me, the force of it rattling the whole frame. Mom always said I was too dramatic, but right now dramatic felt right. I clutched the worn strap of my backpack, the cheap nylon digging into my shoulder. Inside, all my worldly possessions for the foreseeable future. Clothes mostly, a few books, my phone thankfully, and a picture of Mom. I glanced back at the house. Our house. Well, Dad's in her house now. The kitchen light was on, a warm, inviting glow that mocked me. Probably laughing, the two of them. Celebrating the fact that I was gone. I walked. Just walked. Away from Sycamore Street. Away from the manicured lawns and friendly waves that suddenly felt so fake. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. My sneakers pounded the pavement, a steady rhythm against the turmoil in my head. Dad. He used to be Dad. Now he was just different. Ever since she came along. Carol. With her perfect blonde hair. An even more perfect smile. A smile that never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. It had started subtly. Dinner times shifting later and later. Dad's stories at bedtime, replaced by nothing. Just a quick peck on the forehead and good night, kiddo. Then the weekends. Suddenly they were couple time. Hiking. Fancy restaurants. Places I wasn't invited. It was like I was invisible. Or worse, a burden. The final straw was last night. Dinner. Spaghetti, my favorite. But even that tasted like ash. Carol had been going on about redecorating my room. A more mature look, she chirped, her eyes flicking over my posters of bands I loved, the tapestries I'd painstakingly hung myself. Something less you. Dad just nodded, like I wasn't even there. Like my room, my space, my life was hers to just take over. I'd snapped. Told them both exactly what I thought. About Carol's fake smiles. About Dad's indifference. About how they were turning our house into something cold and alien. Dad had actually looked surprised, like he'd forgotten I had opinions. Carol, though, she'd just given me that look. The one that said, "You're being difficult." Like I was the problem. So I left. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. It felt like the walls were closing in, suffocating me. I needed air. Space. Something real. The streetlights blurred as I walked, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't even know where I was going. Just away. But as I rounded a corner I saw it. A small, brightly lit diner, nestled between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront. Rosie's, the neon sign proclaimed. It looked warm. Safe. Maybe I could just get a cup of coffee. A moment to think. I pushed open the door, the bell above jingling a cheerful welcome. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. It was comforting. I walked towards the counter, a few heads turning to look at me. I tried to smile, but it probably came out more like a grimace. I slid onto a stool, my backpack thumping on the floor. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Flo, approached me. "Honey, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice warm and concerned. "What can I get for you?" I hesitated. Should I tell her? Should I explain everything? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I ran away. I blurted, my voice cracking. Flo's eyebrows shot up. Ran away. Honey, are you all right? I shook my head, tears welling up again. My dad, he has a new wife. And she's awful. She's trying to take over everything. Flo's expression softened. Oh, honey, she said, her voice full of sympathy. I understand. I looked at her surprised. You do? She nodded. I've seen it before. More times than I care to remember. Families, they can be complicated things. I sniffled, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I don't know what to do, I whispered. Flo smiled gently. Well, the first thing you're going to do is have a hot chocolate. On the house. And then we're going to talk. I managed a weak smile. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all. Maybe Rosie's diner was exactly what I needed. A place to breathe. A place to figure things out. But as Flo turned to make my hot chocolate, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A man sitting in a booth in the back, his face hidden by a newspaper. He seemed familiar. And as he slowly lowered the newspaper, my blood ran cold. It was him. My dad. And he wasn't alone. Carol was with him. My breath hitched in my throat. What were they doing here? Had they followed me? Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating. I ducked behind the counter, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Flo, I whispered, my voice trembling. They're here. My dad and Carol. They found me. Flo's eyes widened in alarm. She glanced towards the back booth, then quickly ushered me through a swinging door behind the counter. Stay here, she hissed, pushing me into a small, cramped pantry. And be quiet. The pantry was dark and stuffy, crammed with boxes of canned goods and cleaning supplies. I crouched behind a stack of flour sacks, my knees pressed against my chest. I could hear Flo's voice, calm and reassuring, as she greeted my dad and Carol. I held my breath, straining to hear their conversation. Have you seen a young girl? I heard my dad ask, his voice tight with worry. About this tall brown hair carrying a backpack? Can't say I have, Flo replied casually. Lots of folks pass through here. What's she done, run off? She had a little disagreement with her stepmom, my dad said, his voice strained. Teenage angst, you know how it is. Oh, those teenage years, Flo chuckled. Always a handful. You want some coffee while you wait? Maybe she'll turn up. I squeezed my eyes shut, my stomach churning. They were lying. Both of them. Making me out to be some rebellious teenager throwing a tantrum. And Flo, was she playing along? Why was she helping them? Minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. I could hear the clinking of mugs, the murmur of their voices. Then a silence. Had they left? I cautiously peeked through a crack in the door. They were still there, huddled in the booth, talking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see the expression on Carol's face. Smug. Triumphant. Like she'd already won. Despair washed over me. I was trapped. Cornered. There was no escape. I had to get out of here. But how? The back door was probably locked. And I couldn't just walk out the front, not with them sitting there. Then I noticed it. A small window high up on the wall above the shelves. It was cracked open, a thin sliver of moonlight filtering through. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance. I climbed onto a crate, then another, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the dusty shelves. Cans rattled, threatening to spill. I froze, listening. No reaction from the diner. They hadn't heard me. I reached the window, pushing it open with a creak. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to wriggle through, landing with a thud on the alleyway outside. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. The alley was dark and narrow, the air thick with the stench of garbage. I stumbled over trash cans, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. Away from the diner, away from my dad, away from Carol. I emerged onto a busy street, the bright lights and blaring horns a stark contrast to the quiet alley. Cars whizzed by, their headlights cutting through the night. I hesitated, unsure which way to go. Then I saw it. A bus stop, bathed in the yellow glow of a streetlight. A bus schedule was posted, the routes and destinations a blur to my tear-filled eyes. But one name jumped out at me. Willow Creek. A small town hours away. I'd been there once years ago on a family trip. I remembered a quiet lake surrounded by trees. Place where no one knew me. Place where I could start over. I fumbled in my pocket for my wallet. I had a little money, enough for a ticket. Maybe. The bus was due in 10 minutes. I sank onto the bench, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. But as I waited, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. Had I made the right decision? Running away wouldn't solve anything. It would just make things worse. Maybe I should go back. Apologize. Try to work things out. But then I remembered Carol's face. That smug, triumphant smile. And I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. I needed time. Time to think, to breathe, to figure out what I wanted. The bus pulled up, its brakes hissing in the night. I took a deep breath and stepped on board. Willow Creek. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the diner. It was dark now, the neon sign switched off. But I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the doorway watching me. A figure that looked a lot like Flo. And in her hand, she held something that made my blood run cold. My phone. The one I'd left behind in the pantry. My breath hitched. Flo. Here. How had she found me so quickly? A wave of dizziness washed over me. It wasn't just betrayal I felt, but a chilling sense of violation. Like my every move was being watched, anticipated. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. A sharp rap like knuckles on wood. I froze, my mind racing. Should I pretend I wasn't here? No, that wouldn't work. She knew I was here. She'd seen me. Running was pointless too. She'd just follow me. She clearly had my phone, which meant she could probably track me anywhere. I was trapped. I crept back to the window, my hand trembling as I reached for the curtain. I peeked through the gap, my eyes locking with Flo's. Her smile was still there, but it was different now. No longer friendly, no longer reassuring. It was cold, calculating, predatory. She held up my phone, dangling it by her fingertips like a macabre trophy. Then, she pointed to the door of my room. A shiver ran down my spine. She wanted me to open the door. But why? What did she want? I stared at her, my mind reeling. Was she working with my dad and Carol? Had they sent her to bring me back? Or was there something else? Something more sinister? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to barricade myself in the room. But I knew that wouldn't do any good. She'd just keep tapping, keep waiting. And the longer I waited, the more terrified I became. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to unlock the door. I opened it a crack, just enough to see her. Flo stood there, her silhouette framed by the moonlight. She was even taller than I remembered, her figure imposing in the dim light. She didn't say anything. She just held out my phone. Here, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. You forgot this. I stared at the phone, then back at her. Why? I whispered, my voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Flo shrugged. Just returning what's not mine. I narrowed my eyes. That's not what I meant. Why are you here? How did you find me? Flo's smile returned, but it was even more chilling than before. Let's just say I have my ways, she said, her voice laced with a hint of menace. Now, are you going to take your phone or not? I hesitated, my mind racing. This was a trap. I knew it. But I needed my phone. It was my only connection to the outside world. My only way to contact anyone. And maybe I could get some answers from Flo. I reached out and took the phone from her hand. My fingers brushed against hers, and I recoiled as if I'd been burned. Her skin was cold. Too cold. Thank you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Flo nodded. You're welcome. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, she said, her voice low and menacing. You should know, they're not giving up. They're going to keep looking for you. And they won't stop until they find you. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen to the spot, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Her words echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. They weren't giving up. They were coming for me. I closed the door and locked it, my hands shaking. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What was going on? Who was Flo? And what did my dad and Carol want from me? I looked at my phone. It was dead. No battery. Of course. Flo had made sure of that. I was truly alone now, cut off from the world, a prisoner in my own room. I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. I had to get out of here. This place wasn't safe anymore. Flo knew I was here. And if she knew, then they knew too. I looked around the room, my eyes searching for an escape. The window. I could try to climb out again, but what if Flo was still outside? What if she was waiting for me? Then I saw it. A small vent in the ceiling. It was probably just an air duct, but it was worth a shot. I grabbed a chair and climbed onto it, reaching for the vent. It was loose, and with a little effort, I managed to pry it open. It was dark inside, but I could feel a draft of air. It was a long shot, but it was my only chance. I took a deep breath and hoisted myself up into the vent. It was cramped and dusty, but I managed to crawl through it, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where it led, but I knew I had to keep moving. I had to escape. As I crawled through the darkness, I heard a noise. A faint sound, coming from somewhere behind me. A sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Someone was following me. Panic surged through me, clawing at my throat. I scrambled forward, my elbows and knees scraping against the rough metal of the vent. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was, they were gaining on me. I had to get out of this vent. But where? I didn't know where I was going, where it led. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. I felt like I was trapped in a coffin, buried alive. Then I saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead. A way out. I pushed myself forward, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. The light grew brighter, and I realized it was another vent opening. I reached it, pushing the grate open with a groan. I tumbled out of the vent, landing with a thud on a cold, hard floor. I looked around, my eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. I was in a small, dusty room. Boxes were stacked haphazardly against the walls, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. It looked like some kind of storage room. But where? I cautiously got to my feet, my body aching from the fall. I needed to get out of here, find somewhere safe. But first I needed to know where I was. I crept towards the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I could hear voices on the other side, muffled but distinct. I held my breath, listening. "Are you sure she came this way?" a man's voice asked. "I saw her go into the motel," a woman's voice replied. It was Flo. I followed her. "She couldn't have gone far. She's a slippery one," the man said. "We need to find her before she disappears again." My blood ran cold. They were here, in the motel, looking for me. I had to get out of here now. I glanced around the room, my eyes searching for an escape. There was a small window high up on the wall, but it was too high to reach. Then I noticed something else. A door, hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping from beneath it. I crept towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pushed it open, slipping through into the darkness beyond. I found myself in a narrow hallway, dimly lit by a single bare bulb. I could hear the voices more clearly now, coming from the other end of the hallway. I had to get away from them. But which way? I didn't know where I was, where this hallway led. I hesitated, my mind racing. Then I made a decision. I would go towards the voices. It was a risk, but it was my only chance. I crept down the hallway, my footsteps silent on the worn carpet. The voices grew louder, and I could make out the words now. "She's got to be here somewhere," Flo said. "We just need to find her." "We will," the man said. "We'll find her." I reached the end of the hallway, peering around the corner. I was in another room, larger than the last. It was a lounge of some sort, with threadbare couches and armchairs scattered around. A fireplace dominated one wall, its embers glowing faintly. And there they were, Flo and the man, standing by the fireplace, talking in low voices. I ducked back behind the wall, my heart pounding. It was him. My dad. He looked different than I remembered. Older somehow. More haggard. But it was definitely him. What were they doing here? Why were they looking for me? Flo had said they wouldn't give up, but I hadn't expected them to come after me so quickly. What did they want? I had to get out of here. But how? There was only one door, and they were blocking it. I glanced around the room, my eyes searching for an escape. Then I saw it. A window hidden behind a heavy curtain. It was my only chance. I crept towards the window, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet. I reached the curtain, pulling it back cautiously. The window was unlocked. I slid it open, slipping out into the cool night air. I found myself on a balcony, overlooking the motel parking lot. Below me, I could see their car, a sleek black sedan. It was my dad's car. He was really here. I had to get away from here, before they saw me. But where could I go? I was in a strange town, in the middle of the night. I didn't know anyone, didn't have anywhere to go. Then I saw it. A figure standing in the shadows watching me. A figure that made my blood run cold. It was Carol. And she was smiling. Carol's smile was like ice, sharp and unforgiving. It sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't just smiling. She was gloating. Like a cat that had finally cornered its prey. I knew in that instant that running was no longer an option. She'd seen me. There was nowhere left to go. I stood frozen on the balcony, my mind racing. What did she want? Why was she here? And where was my dad? He had been inside with Flo just moments ago. Had they split up? Were they surrounding me? Carol didn't move. She just stood there watching me, her smile never wavering. The silence between us was thick with tension, broken only by the chirping of crickets. It felt like an eternity. Finally she spoke, her voice soft, almost melodic. But there was a steel edge to it that made my stomach churn. "Hello, Sarah," she said. She used my real name, not the fake one I'd given at the motel. She knew who I was. She'd always known. I didn't reply. I just stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Don't be afraid," she said, taking a step closer. "We just want to talk." "Talk?" I scoffed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "About what?" "About how you've ruined my life." Carol's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, even more chilling than before. "Don't be dramatic, Sarah," she said. "We only want what's best for you." "Best for me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You call this best for me? Chasing me across the state? Trying to trap me?" Carol sighed, as if she was dealing with a particularly difficult child. "You're being unreasonable, Sarah," she said. "We're just trying to help you. You're going through a difficult time. We understand that. We want to help you through it." "By taking over my life?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "By turning my dad against me? By making me feel like I don't belong in my own home?" Carol's expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "You're being selfish. You're only thinking about yourself." "Me?" I shouted, my voice echoing across the parking lot. "I'm being selfish? You're the one who came into our lives and turned everything upside down. You're the one who's trying to replace my mom." Carol flinched at that, her eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare talk about your mother," she hissed. "Why not?" I challenged. "Because it's true? Because you know you'll never be her? Because you know you'll never be a real mother to me?" Carol lunged at me, her hand raised to strike. I flinched, bracing myself for the impact. But it never came. A hand grabbed Carol's arm, stopping her in midair. I looked up and saw my dad standing there, his face a mask of anger. "Carol, stop it," he shouted. Carol struggled against his grip, her face contorted with rage. "She needs to learn her place," she screamed. "Her place?" my dad repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Her place is with me. And you're not going to touch her." He pulled Carol away from me, his grip tight. "Get in the car," he said, his voice cold. Carol glared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll get you, Sarah. You'll see." She turned and stormed off, slamming the car door behind her. My dad stood there for a moment, his back to me. Then he turned around, his face etched with exhaustion and regret. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and helplessness. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. Finally, he just shook his head and walked away, getting into the car. He started the engine, and the car pulled away from the motel, disappearing into the night. I stood there on the balcony watching them go. I didn't know what to think. My dad had defended me. But why? Did he finally see what Carol was really like? Or was it just a temporary truce? I didn't trust either of them. Not anymore. They were both playing a game, and I was just a pawn in their twisted little drama. I was alone. Completely and utterly alone. I went back inside my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on the bed, my mind reeling. So many questions and no answers. What was going to happen now? Would they come back? Would Carol try to hurt me again? And what about my dad? Where did he stand in all of this? I looked around the room, my eyes searching for something, anything that could give me a clue. Then I saw it. A small piece of paper tucked under the edge of the bed. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. It was a note, and it was addressed to me. My heart pounded as I unfolded the note. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted and hurried. It read, "Sarah, I know what's happening. They're not who you think they are. Meet me at the old mill on the outskirts of town. Midnight. Come alone. Trust no one. A friend." My breath hitched. A friend? Who? Who could possibly know what was happening? And what did they mean? "They're not who you think they are?" The question swirled in my mind, a confusing vortex of suspicion and hope. Midnight. The old mill. It was risky, incredibly so. But it was also my only lead, my only chance to find out the truth. I glanced at the clock. 11:30. I didn't have much time. I grabbed my backpack, shoving a few essentials inside. I needed to be quick, discreet. I couldn't risk being seen. I slipped out of the motel room, careful to avoid the main lobby. I used the back exit, the same way I'd escaped earlier, and made my way through the deserted streets of Willow Creek. The old mill was on the edge of town, a crumbling relic of a bygone era. It stood silhouetted against the moonlit sky, a dark and imposing structure. As I approached, I could hear the wind whistling through the broken windows, a mournful sound that echoed my own unease. The mill was eerily quiet, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet. I walked through the cavernous main room, my eyes scanning the shadows. I was alone. "Hello." I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Had I been wrong? Was this a trap? Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard a sound. A rustling noise coming from the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the moonlight. It was Flo. My stomach clenched. I'd been right to be suspicious. This was a trap. "You," I hissed, my voice filled with anger. "You set me up." Flo held up her hands, as if to appease me. "No, Sarah, please," she said, her voice urgent. "I'm here to help you." "Help me," I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "You stole my phone. You lied to me." "I had to," she said. "They were watching me. They're always watching." "Who?" I demanded. "Who's watching?" Flo hesitated, glancing nervously around. "Your dad and Carol," she whispered. "They're not who they say they are." "What do you mean?" I asked, my mind reeling. They're not your real family," she said, her voice barely a whisper. My breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" Flo took a deep breath, her eyes filled with fear. "Your real parents, they were taken. Years ago. By them. Taken." I repeated, my voice trembling. "What do you mean taken?" Flo shook her head. "I can't explain it here," she said. "It's too dangerous. But I can show you. I have proof." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to me, her hand trembling. I looked at the photograph. It was a picture of a young couple, smiling and holding a baby. The baby, it was me. But the couple, they weren't my dad and Carol. They were strangers. "Who are they?" I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Your real parents," Flo said. Tears welled up in my eyes. But my dad. "He's not your father," Flo said. He's part of them. He's been watching you, waiting for the right time." "Waiting for what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Flo said. "But I know it's not good. That's why I'm helping you. I'm getting you out of here." She reached into her pocket again and pulled out a set of keys. "This is my car," she said. "It's parked around back. We need to leave now, before they find us." I hesitated, my mind racing. Could I trust her? Was this another trap? But I looked at the photograph, at the smiling faces of my real parents, and I knew I had to take the chance. I took the keys from Flo's hand. "Let's go," I said. We ran out of the mill, the wind whipping around us. We got into Flo's car, a beat-up old sedan, and she started the engine. As we pulled away from the mill, I looked back. And I saw them, my dad and Carol, standing in the shadows watching us go. Carol's face was contorted with rage, and my dad, he looked lost, confused, almost sad. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and I was going to find it no matter the cost. The journey was just beginning.